Hey gang, we're gonna do some more dyeing today just for fun. The good kind of dyeing, not the bad kind of dyeing. I'm just warming up some citric acid water I have here. This is water I used as a pre-soak before. I usually save it and recycle it. Like, why waste citric acid, right? So what I want to do is some experimental stuff. So I have here my combed BFL that I combed from, just give me a little piece here, from these locks. Now what I'm going to do, I'm not going to pre-soak. We're going to drop this in dry and we're going to see if it breaks the dye, because I found that often when you dye it dry, that's what happens. We're also going to dye some locks so you can see how the color shifts between locks and combed fiber. I have some mystery dyes. This is like a purpley color, and this is a green. Let's see if you can see that better. I think it might have been a black at one point. Anyways, I've been using up all my, there's Bobbo. There he is. I've been using up all my bits and bobs of dyes so I can start fresh with everything. Because some of these could be 3 or 4 years old. Don't know. So for this experiment, I will use these dyes and we'll see what happens. I'm just letting my water heat up here. I just use, I have a little hot plate. So I'm just going to use that to heat my water and do my dyeing. And I will be back when the water is ready to go and we're ready to start dyeing. I'll just keep doing this to you. Are you getting sick yet? Just try to adjust it so you can see what I'll be doing. All right, there we go. I'll be back when the water's warm. So our water temperature is up to 96. So that's warm enough for me to work with. I'll leave the heat on, of course, so it continues to warm up. So let's start with some green. Sounds like someone's peeing. Okay, that should give us a fairly pale green. Oh, depending on the amount of fiber that we add. All right, let's start with some locks. Now I'm putting them in dry. They're at room temperature. The water's not boiling. There should be no issues with this. Now, if I'd soak this in cold water, dumping it into the hot water might be different. But we're just going to drop the locks in. Give them a little push to encourage them to sink. All right, so the green does not break, I'm going to guess. Well, that'd make a lovely green. All right, and we want to add a little bit of roving. So we'll pull off the end and we'll take about half of that. Now you'll want to be careful once it's combed. It's much, much more likely to felt. So you want to handle that as little as possible. I'm going to dump that in the other side. Squish it down. There. Now I'm going to wait until the dye bath exhausts. You can see how green it is right now. So we'll end up with a really pale green. Although we could have some fun by just squirting some of this on top. There. Now we're just going to leave that. We're not going to stir it. Nothing. Bring my thermometer back so I can monitor temperature. You can see the temperature is coming up quickly now. I'm going to guess it's touching the bottom of the pot though, so I'm going to tilt it a bit. All right, I'm going to let this heat for a bit and we'll be back to check on it. So interestingly enough, the dark color I added in actually appears to be navy blue. Let's get you here so you can see that. So I kind of like it. So I'm going to add a little bit more. Now there's chunks in this, probably because it's so old, but we'll use it up anyways. I'll just plop that on top and we'll see what happens. So temperature is all the way up to 166, steaming away nicely. We still have dye suspended. It hasn't fully struck yet. So I am going to add just a smidge of citric acid, as it's likely a lot of it was absorbed in the previous use of the water. I buy my citric acid in bulk as much as I can. I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit on top of everything. About a tablespoon, it's probably more than enough. And then I'm just going to gently push it down. I'm not so worried about the locks. I am about the bat. I don't want it to felt. So I'm going to gently lift it. Gently lift it. And push down again. Just to kind of mist that citric acid in. Now I have a lot of water for a little bit of fiber in here because I'm just mucking about. But you can see the color is starting to strike now. It just needed a little more acid. All right, I'm going to let that cook for a bit. And if it still hasn't fully struck, I'll add a little bit more citric acid or some fiber to try to absorb the last of that dye. I'll update you. All right, so I've been looking and I have very little fiber in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a handful of locks to the side here to kind of absorb the last of that dye. I usually keep a little bit of odds and ends of fleeces on hand to use as like dye sponges to soak up the last of a bath. Leads to some interesting colors. All right, we'll let that cook another few minutes and see if it absorbs. Well, that took like a minute. There's a very tiny hint of color left in here, but since I'm just going to be reusing it, I'm not worrying about it. I'm going to be using the same colors, so it's fine. So I'm just going to fish these out. We got some lovely colors. Put them to drain and cool. All right, there's a little more green in there than I expected, but that's all right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the last of this and I'm going to dump it right in there. Okay, I'm going to throw that in the sink. this a stir. So it's a navy blue. You can see how quickly that took up. All right, I'm going to add just a bit more citric acid. About a half a teaspoon. And I'll mix that in. Wow, that's pretty. All right, and I am going to dump in my comb top. I have a little nest here. I'm going to leave it like that. Set it on the surface and squish it down. Well, this is interesting. It's showing up more as like a dark gray black on this. Oh, until you lift it out. Okay. And I have a little bit more here. We'll throw that in. And top it off with the rest of this lock. So I have about a ½ pound total here of processed and raw fiber. You can see how the tips on this fleece are discolored. Let me get you in a little closer. So I'm going to dye that to get rid of that discoloration, but you don't notice it in the comb top because that color is spread out. You won't have a perfectly white fleece when you're done. Wow, look at this interesting thing that's happening here. Our blue is becoming red. Wow. I must have used a mix on that and the blue struck first. I always find red is very hard to get to strike, so that does not surprise me. Just pushing it all down. Let's see how we're doing here. All right. Now our water is almost boiling and I don't want it to boil, actively boil. So I'm going to turn the heat down. Wow. I don't know what's happening here, but I'm here for it. I'm loving it. Just trying to make a little volcano in the middle here where the heat can escape from the bottom. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. I am just loving these colors that are appearing. Here, bring it down this way so the light hits it. There's some reds and some oranges and some blues. It's just like, wow. That's all I can say. Wow. So, obviously, once we absorbed enough of the blue, the remaining color broke into the different tones of whatever I had in that bottle. And it's very, very interesting. And you can see the water is almost fully cleared. All that's left is that little bit of red. Let me just check over here. Yep. It's the red. Sadie, if you're watching, it's not just you. See, I have problems with the red too. Now let's see. It is fully penetrated through all of the locks. So I'm going to give it a little bit, see if the red will finish striking. If not, we'll throw in some more locks to absorb it, and then we'll see what we end up with. I'll update you. So it's been a few more minutes, and we still have a little bit of a pinky hue. So that red isn't absorbing. And I have just a tiny bit of locks left, just this little bit here. I'm going to just pull all this aside and plop that in and see if we can soak up the last of that dye. Whoop, there's a piece of plastic in there. I was wondering where that got to. Oh, and a piece of yarn. Wow. All right, just push that down. Keeping the temperature, it's right now about 178, 179. It's almost at 180, so I'm going to just lower the temperature just a bit. And give this a couple of minutes to see if we can absorb the last of that pink. It's just giving a blush of color to those locks. I'll update you. Couple minutes later, and our dye bath is finally exhausted. So we got some very interesting colors happening here. This was our initial dye with the green and a little bit of the blue on top. It gave us this beautiful, I don't know, seaweed is what I would call it. It's so gorgeous. So now I'll pull these colors out and let them drain and cool for a while, and we'll wash them later. So I will be back in a few hours when it's cooled and ready to be washed. So our fiber has all cooled down. Now we're going to give it a wash. I don't want to use water that's too hot, so let me just adjust here. I'm going to use some of my 2-in-1 shampoo. Do a few pumps in there. Mix that in. That's a nice temperature. All right, so here's our locks, and they came out in some very interesting colors. It's like the tips took the red and the base took the blue. So we'll drop that into our wash. This was our sopping fibers just to absorb the last of that red dye. It came out in this fluffy, it's almost a peach rather than a pink, although there is some pink in it. I'm not disappointed with the results. I think it's quite lovely. So we'll throw that in our wash bath. So here was our original bath. So when I first put the fiber in, this is the colors that came out, and you can see how it goes from like a inky midnight blue with some little streaks of a peach almost in it, where it started to had absorbed the blue and was just working on the red. So we'll pop that in. And these were the locks we did in the original blue, and you can see the tips came out almost black and into that midnight blue in the base. I wish I knew how I made this because it is amazing. I may have to take these locks and lock spin them to preserve that color because it is so beautiful. It's like a black to a midnight blue. So we'll pop that in there. And our first bath with the green and a little bit of that mix. This was our roving, and you can see it's got little puddles and pools of blue, some yellows, some greens. It's very, very pretty. And these are the locks and how they turned out. So the tips take first. They took the green, and then where I added in that mixed color, it came out in a blue. Again, very, very pretty. All right, I'm going to let those soak for 10 minutes or so. Let's see if we have any color bleed. Maybe a little bit, but not a whole lot. So after I've washed this, let it sit for about 10 minutes or so, I'll give it a rinse, spin it with my salad spinner, and put it out to dry. And when it's dry, I'll show you the final colors. All right, our dyed fiber is all dry. So you can see the dried colors. If it will focus. Focus. Hold on, we'll zoom in and see if it'll focus. There we go. So you can see how it's got that pretty midnight blue into this deep blue. This was our soak up the last of the dye. So we ended up with peach tips and some pink tonal to it. I think once this is blended out, it would make like a nice peach color. These were done with the greens and the blues. And the colors are just amazing. Just beautiful. And this was the strike that happened with that blend. It's almost like a bronze, maybe a rose gold. Yeah, I'd call that a rose gold and midnight blue. And it's like distributed throughout the fiber. So that's going to be fun to play with. Here is our original combed fiber. And you can see how that dark mix just struck blue to go with the green, which is light into some yellows in some places. It's just gorgeous. And this is so soft. This BFL is amazing. Got a little bit of grit in it from mixing it with the stuff that wasn't combed, but that's all right. And it didn't felt. It's all very soft and open. And it's going to be beautiful to work with. So this was dumping it into the unknown dark batch. And you can see how it struck this gorgeous midnight blue. But it does have a couple of spots like this, which have faded out to like a gray tone, which is absolutely gorgeous. It just gives it almost a tonal gray color throughout. So that was another fun experiment, using up some leftover dyes. Of course, none of it can be replicated, although I may try at some point to see if I can do that. It'll be fun experiments. We'll try that in the future. But for now, thanks for joining me. If you like the experiments, whether they're successes or failures, subscribe and come join me. Thanks, guys. Bye.